pick up a single spoon of baking soda. That is all today is about. One ordinary spoon, and the two big promises people have pinned on it. Promise 1. Stir it into a little water and it clears the aphids and spider mites off your plants. Promise 2. Sprinkle it around your tomatoes and the fruit comes out sweeter. Here is what almost no one tells you. That spoon will not kill a single one of those insects, and used around your tomatoes, it can quietly bring on the one disorder that turns a perfect fruit to leather at the bottom. But do not set the spoon down just yet, because by the end of these 18 minutes you will know exactly what genuinely clears those pests for pennies, exactly what truly makes a tomato sweet, and the one honest job that spoon is actually good for. No scare tactics, just what works, explained the way a neighbor who has grown this for 40 years would explain it. This is rooted grace. 2 promises, 2 honest answers, and a free test at the end that costs you nothing. Start with the bugs, because that is where good gardeners waste the most effort on advice that was never quite true. So, the first promise, the one about clearing your pests, aphids and spider mites are the quiet thieves of a vegetable garden. They pierce the leaves and stems of your tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, and beans, and drink the sap, and when enough of them gather, the plant slows down. The leaves curl and yellow, and the flowers and fruit thin out. So the advice spread fast. A spoon of baking soda in water, a few drops of soap, spray it on, and your pest troubles are over. Here is the part that surprises people. The baking soda in that spray is not what is clearing your pests. It does almost nothing to an insect. In fact, the one official garden job baking soda has, recognized by the Environmental Protection Agency, is as a mild treatment for fungus, not a killer of bugs. So for decades, gardeners have been thanking the wrong ingredient. Look closely at the recipe and the real worker is hiding in plain sight, the soap. A soft-bodied insect like an aphid or a mite is held together and kept from drying out by a thin, waxy outer layer. Mild soap cuts through that layer so the insect loses its moisture. A fine oil smothers it and its eggs. The baking soda is just along for the ride. That is why the spray seems to work, and why you could leave the baking soda out entirely and get the very same result. And here is the common mistake that harms more plants than the pests do. Reaching for grease-cutting dish detergent because it is what sits under the sink. The same stuff that strips bacon fat off a pan strips the protective wax right off your leaves, and you end up with scorched, papery foliage. If you spray soap, use a mild, pure soap, a true insecticidal soap, or plain Castile soap, never a heavy degreaser. And never spray in the midday sun when a wet leaf and hot light scorch together. So what actually clears aphids and spider mites cheaply tonight? Start with the simplest thing of all, the one almost everyone skips: water. A sharp blast of plain water from the hose knocks aphids clean off the plant, and the honest truth is most of them never find their way back up. Do that 2 or 3 mornings in a row, and you have solved most of the problem without spraying anything at all. If they keep coming, then mix your soap spray, about a teaspoon of mild pure soap in a quart of water, and coat the undersides of the leaves and the tender new shoots, where they gather. Soap only works on contact, so you have to actually wet the insects, and you will need to repeat it every 5 to 7 days as new ones hatch. For a heavier case, or for mites in particular, a light horticultural oil or neem oil smothers both the adults and the eggs. A quick word on mixing that oil, since it is the step people get wrong. Stir about a teaspoon of horticultural or neem oil into a quart of water with a single drop of that same mild soap to help it blend, and spray it in the cool of the evening rather than the heat of the day. Oil works by coating and smothering, so cover the leaf surfaces thoroughly, top and underside, and plan to repeat it in a week or 2. That same gentle soap and oil approach handles their close cousins too, whiteflies, and the little cottony specks of mealybugs. And know what you are dealing with in terms of sheer numbers. Aphids breed astonishingly fast. The females can produce live young without even mating, so a small cluster becomes a crowd in a matter of days. That speed is exactly why one spray almost never finishes the job, and why a quick check of the undersides every few mornings, with a light touch each time, works far better than a single heavy soaking. Now, a single insight that will save your tomatoes and cucumbers in a hot, dry spell. Spider mites are not truly insects, and they thrive in exactly the conditions a baking soda spray will never change: heat, dust, and dry air. They explode on dusty, drought-stressed plants. So one of the most effective things you can do costs nothing. Rinse your plants down and keep them from baking dry and dust-caked. Mites hate moisture. A regular spray of plain water on the undersides of the leaves is both your early warning and your discouragement. And learn to read which pest you have, because it changes your move. Aphids you can see plainly: soft green, black, or gray bodies clustered on the newest shoots, often with a sticky shine called honeydew, and ants marching up to tend them like livestock. Spider mites you can barely see. They show first as a fine, pale speckling stippled across the leaf, and in a bad case, delicate webbing in the leaf joints. Hold a sheet of white paper under a suspect leaf and tap it. If the dust that falls begins to crawl, those are mites. There is one more helper most people spray right over the top of. Ladybugs and the little alligator-shaped larvae of lacewings eat aphids by the hundreds. A garden that is not blanketed in sprays keeps those helpers around, and they do the steady work for you, for free. So before you reach for any bottle at all, it is worth asking whether the garden is about to fix itself. It also helps to know when to act and when to simply let the garden be. A few aphids on a sturdy plant are nothing to fear. They are also the very food that draws the ladybugs in. The time to step in is when colonies start building thickly on the new growth, when leaves curl and pucker, or when that sticky honeydew and its black mold appear. Acting then, early and lightly, beats drenching a whole garden over a handful of insects you could have left to the helpers. The cheapest control of all, though, is the one that happens before a single aphid arrives. These pests are drawn to soft, sappy new growth, which is exactly what too much nitrogen feed produces, so an overfed plant becomes a beacon for them. Feed moderately and you grow tougher, less tempting leaves. Inspect any new plant for hitchhikers before it joins the others. And deal with the ants, because ants will actually move aphids from plant to plant and shield them, just to harvest their honeydew, break up the ant trails, and the aphids lose the very allies that were tending them. You can also let other plants do quiet work for you. A ring of nasturtiums planted nearby pulls aphids toward itself and away from your vegetables, and a drift of sweet alyssum dill or fennel in bloom brings in the very ladybugs and lacewings that clean the aphids up. A mixed, flowering garden looks after itself far better than a bare row ever will. So where does that leave the spoon of baking soda in all this? It has one small, honest place. Heavy aphid feeding leaves that sticky honeydew behind, and a black, sooty mold often grows on top of it. The mild alkaline film from a baking soda spray can discourage that fungal film, which is, once again, baking soda doing the only thing it is genuinely good at: working gently against fungus, never against bugs. That is the first promise sorted. The second one, the one about sweeter tomatoes, is where the spoon turns from merely useless into something that can cost you the whole harvest. Here is why. Nothing quite beats a tomato you grew yourself, still warm off the vine. So the promise is hard to resist. The fruit tastes a little tart. Baking soda is alkaline, so sprinkle some around the roots. Cut the acid in the soil, and the tomato comes out sweeter. It sounds like simple kitchen chemistry. It falls apart on the very first honest look, because that is not how a tomato makes its flavor. Every tomato carries acid inside it. That is not a defect to be neutralized. It is part of what a tomato is. What makes one taste sweet and another taste sharp is not how much acid it holds, but how much sugar sits beside that acid to cover it on your tongue. The famous Sun Gold cherry tomato tastes like candy, yet measured in a laboratory it is genuinely acidic. It is simply flooded with sugar. And here is the quiet truth underneath it all. The plant controls the acid inside its own fruit so tightly that the pH of your soil barely reaches it. You cannot neutralize your way to a sweet tomato. No path from the soil to the flavor runs through a box of baking soda. But here is the part that should stop you cold, because it is worse than simply not working. The sodium in baking soda does not just sit there harmlessly. Sodium competes with calcium down at the roots. It crowds calcium out, and it slows the flow of water that carries calcium up into the plant. And a tomato starved of calcium develops blossom end rot. That sunken, leathery black patch on the bottom of the fruit that sends a beautiful tomato straight to the compost pile. Read that again. The little trick people use hoping for a sweeter tomato can bring on the exact disorder that ruins it. Extension offices list excess sodium among the causes of blossom end rot, right alongside uneven watering. So the spoon you sprinkled for sweetness can hand you rot instead. The common mistake, then, is putting baking soda anywhere near your tomato roots. And the larger version of it is using baking soda as a regular soil treatment of any kind. Sodium simply has no job to do in your soil. It does not feed your plants. It is rarely in short supply. And in many soils it does not rinse away easily. So skip it entirely. So how do you actually grow a sweeter tomato? It comes down to a handful of things you usually control, and not one of them lives in your pantry. First, the variety. Sweetness is bred in, not poured on. If you want candy off the vine, grow a naturally high sugar type, a Sun Gold, a Sweet 100, a small grape tomato. Let go of the old idea that pale or yellow tomatoes are automatically low in acid. The milder taste you notice is mostly extra sugar, not less acid. And if it is deep, complex flavor you are after rather than pure candy, the old heirlooms like Brandywine and Cherokee Purple carry sugar and acid in rich balance, and that balance, not the absence of acid, is what tastes like a real tomato. Second, sun. Sugar is built from sunlight. Give your plants 6 to 8 hours of full, direct sun, and do not let them crowd one another into shade. More light across the season means more sugar in the fruit, plainly and simply. Third, and this is the one most people get backwards, water. Steady. Even watering through the growing season is what prevents both cracked skins and that blossom end rot from a moment ago. But as the fruit begins to ripen, easing back just slightly on the water concentrates the sugars instead of diluting them. Consistent while it grows, a touch leaner as it colors up. That is the rhythm sweet tomatoes are grown on. One more truth about that blossom end rot, because it saves real heartbreak. Most garden soil already holds plenty of calcium. The rot is usually not a shortage in the ground, it is a delivery failure. When erratic watering keeps the calcium that is there from ever reaching the fruit. That is why tossing crushed eggshells or antacid tablets around a plant rarely rescues it in time. The real remedy is humble and free, water on a steady schedule, and a layer of mulch to hold that moisture even. Steady watering does more to stop blossom end rot than any product you can buy. Fourth, do not drown them in nitrogen. A heavy hand with high nitrogen feed pushes out lush green leaves at the expense of flavor and leaves you with a big plant and watery fruit. Feed moderately and lean toward potassium, which supports the quality and the sugars in the fruit. There is even a number behind all of this. Growers measure a tomato's sweetness as something called Brix, the share of sugars dissolved in the juice. You do not need a meter to use the idea. The very things that raise that number are the ones already in your hands. Full sun, controlled watering, ripeness, and a light touch with nitrogen. It is also why a cherry tomato tastes so much sweeter than a big slicer. The small fruits naturally pack a higher share of sugar. Size and sweetness tend to pull in opposite directions. And finally, let them finish on the vine. A tomato picked early to ripen on the kitchen counter never builds the sugar it would have built on the plant. Patience, in that last week, is its own quiet kind of sweetener, and once you have grown that sweet tomato, do not undo it in the last step. Never store a fresh, ripe tomato in the refrigerator. Cold below about 55 degrees dulls the aromas and turns the flesh mealy, and much of the flavor you worked all season for is lost for good. Keep them on the counter, out of direct sun, stem side down, and eat them while they are at their peak. Flavor is grown in the garden, but it can be thrown away in the kitchen. What if a real test shows your soil truly is too acidic for tomatoes? Then you do the exact opposite of adding sodium. You reach for garden lime or dolomitic lime, which gently raises the pH and hands the plant the calcium it needs, the very calcium that protects against blossom end rot. But you do that only after a soil test tells you it is needed, and that points straight to the free test promised at the start. Before that test, a small gift to go with this video. There is a free one-page garden guide you can keep out in the shed. The gentle pest sprays. Measured out. The do this not that on soap and timing. The real list of what makes a tomato sweet. And the soil test you are about to learn, all on a single sheet. Point your phone's camera at the code on the screen and it comes right up. No sign up, nothing to buy. Just a handy page so you never have to hunt back through the video for a number. Here is that test, and it finally gives the spoon of baking soda an honest, useful purpose. You can get a rough read on whether your soil leans acidic or alkaline using two things already in your kitchen: the baking soda and a bottle of white vinegar. Dig down 4 to 6 inches in the bed you care about, not the dry surface, which gets thrown off by mulch and recent rain. Pull a few scoops, mix them together, pick out the stones, and split the soil into 2 cups. Pour a little vinegar over the first. If it foams, your soil is alkaline, above 7. Add a spoon of baking soda and a splash of water to the second. If that one fizzes, your soil is acidic, below 7. If neither does much of anything, you are sitting near neutral, right where most vegetables are happiest. And what you do with the answer is simple. Acidic soil, and you are growing blueberries or azaleas? You are in luck. They love it that way. Acidic soil, and you want tomatoes? A measured dose of lime brings it back toward neutral. Reads alkaline. Lean on compost rather than lime. The test does not just feed your curiosity, it tells you which lever to pull. Just respect its one limit. It shows the direction your soil leans, not the exact number, so before any big change, a few dollars to your county extension office buys you a precise reading. And while that fizz is fresh in your mind, let me put one last baking soda myth to rest, because it leans on the very same reaction. You may have seen the tip about wiping houseplant leaves with baking soda water to release carbon dioxide and feed photosynthesis. The chemistry simply does not allow it. Baking soda only gives off real carbon dioxide when it meets an acid or gets hot, and a clean, cool leaf is neither one. Wiping the dust off your houseplants truly does help them, because dust blocks the light they live on. But plain water on a soft cloth does that job perfectly, with no white film left behind. So here is where that single spoon ends up. It will not clear your aphids or your spider mites. The soap and the oil do that, and a blast of water does even more for free. It will not sweeten your tomatoes. Sun, the right variety, steady watering, and a little patience do that. And used around the roots, it can bring on the rot that ruins them. Its one honest job is the small, quiet stuff, easing a little fungus on a leaf and helping you read your soil's pH in 2 cups on the counter. The longer you garden, the more you see that the best results come not from the newest trick, but from understanding what is really happening in the soil, on the leaf, inside the fruit. Knowing the why is what turns a list of tips into judgment you can trust, and that kind of understanding only deepens, season after season. So the next time someone hands you a clever shortcut with that spoon, you will know just what to keep and what to set gently aside. If something here surprised you or saved you a plant, go ahead and subscribe so the next one finds you. Tell me in the comments what you are growing this year and what you have always wondered about, and pass this along to a friend who would want the honest version too. Until next time, keep your hands in the soil, keep asking the good questions, and stay rooted in grace.